Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Center for International Governance, or CIGI as we say. My name is Fred Kuntz. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at CIGI. Tonight's signature lecture is co-sponsored by CIGI and the Balsley School of International Affairs, located here at the CIGI campus. I'd also like to thank CIGI's public event sponsors, 570 News and Wordsworth Books. Besides the audience here tonight, we have a global audience watching on the live webcast. Following tonight's address, we welcome questions from the audience, either at the microphones here at CIGI, or if you're watching online, you can ask questions to the live chat function on your screen, and we'll transmit those questions to our guests. Our subject tonight is Broadcasting Revolution, How Media Have Influenced the Arab Uprisings. Our guest speaker tonight is Habib Battah, and I'll say more about him in just a few seconds. But first, I'd like to mention our discussant this evening, following Habib's address, and joining him on stage will be Bessma Momani. She is a CIGI Senior Fellow, a non-resident Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and a Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo and the Balsley School of International Affairs. A frequent commentator to the media, Dr. Momani is a global governance expert in Middle Eastern foreign policy and international financial institutions. Habib Battah is a Beirut-based journalist, filmmaker, and media critic. He's been covering Arab media for publications and broadcasters in the West and in the Middle East for several years. He's also contributed to CNN, Variety, BBC World, MTV, and others. He's focused mainly on social impact and public diplomacy at pan-Arab satellite stations, including the major Arab Gulf networks Al Jazeera and Al Arabia, as well as an increasing number of Western and Asian state-backed outlets now broadcasting to the region in Arabic. Habib has covered Lebanon's media scene extensively and has written on mainstream and social media in Syria and Egypt in relation to the Arab Spring. He has a BA in journalism from the University of Texas, an MA from New York University, and just last year he won the EU Samir Kassir Press Freedom Award for investigative journalism for his piece on the Jewish community in Lebanon. So please now welcome Habib Battah.
Okay, how do I get this going here? Get the screen on? The projector, oh. Oh, okay. There we go. So, thank you for coming. This is a picture of Gaddafis compound in Libya. And when it was taken over by the rebels, we can see the flag of Qatar right there, flying over it. Qatar is a very small country with pretty much no military to speak of. And Gaddafi's Libya had a massive army, one of the biggest in the Arab world, hundreds of tanks, and yet this tiny little nation with a population under 1 million, well under 1 million, was able to hang its flag over one of the most powerful leaders in the Middle East. So this is really the story of how powerful media has become in the Arab world as a tool. And we're seeing many governments now that want to start media in the Gulf countries. The Emirates has now a new channel. Qatar, Saudi Arabia has a channel. So we're seeing a lot of interest in this. But what I want to talk about today is these are all really big corporations sponsored by governments. I want to talk about people, young people, and the citizen reporting and citizen journalism, which is now challenging even these challengers of other regimes. So I want to show you. Now, the Syrian government, like many governments in the Arab world, has tried to keep a lid on the media coming out of its country. It's tried to keep a lid on the message. And it has failed, like many governments have in the Arab world. Because the Syrian government has clamped down, has stopped journalists from reporting in Syria, or restricted their movement so severely that they can't report, we have seen this emergence, this explosion of citizen journalists covering the story, taking it upon themselves to make up for the lack of journalism in their towns and cities. And I want to show you an example of this entire year of war has been covered, one of the first wars probably covered entirely, mainly to a large extent, by citizen journalists and not reporters. And this is what the kind of videos that we're seeing constantly in the Arab world today.
البيسا في حمص.
A video from Homs, Syria, about 2 weeks ago. The city is under attack by shelling.
قصف طيران مروحي وطيران حربي يقصف مدينة تلبيس. هذه المدينة فيها أكثر من 50,000 نسمة جميعهم مدنيون يوجد بها بعض عناصر الجيش الحر.
So he's saying that the town is under attack by the military aircraft, and that it also hosts a lot of rebel fighters in the town. Now, just like this man is running, telling a story, we're seeing this pattern throughout. We're seeing a whole generation of people that were never expected to be journalists, but have become reporters in their towns by force or by accident, and they're being trained as reporters in war, in the worst circumstances. And not all of these journalists are just filming battles. Some of them are also doing a bit of reporting. You'll see in this report on the humanitarian situation. So we can see the state of the lack of food, the garbage in the streets, people's issues, people's problems. These young people, young amateurs, are going out and reporting almost as journalists would on the problems in their towns and cities. We forward here a little bit, see that people are queuing up for food and water and a lot of scarce. People are trying to get gasoline, desperate situation. Why don't you go to school, he asked them, because the school is closed. Now, these videos get aired, they're not just on YouTube, and they're not just available to people who have internet access, because we know that in the Arab world, people on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook are a very small minority, about 1% or less in many cases. But these videos do get shown on the major Arab TV networks, the satellite TV networks like Al Jazeera, that reach almost 90% of the region in places. So while you might not have internet, the broadcasters are out there and picking up these videos from the internet and broadcasting them to homes across the region. And you know, just to give you an idea here, I want to show you an image. Even in, even in shacks, this is a shack in Lebanon near a construction site. Now, Syrian workers in Lebanon live in these construction shacks, and they have no plumbing. They wash themselves with buckets of water. They make probably like $20 a day, but they have a satellite dish. And And recently, I was talking to some people living in a container, in a rusted container, a group of maybe 20, 25-year-old Syrian refugees, 3 months. They had been living in Lebanon. They escaped Syria. And the first thing they asked me was if I could help them download Skype on the BlackBerry. And they were living in containers. Why is Skype important? It's not just about Twitter and Facebook. Some people are using Skype now, Skype groups, to broadcast news. So any way information is getting out, it's getting out there. And these people, they might not even know how to use email, but they know how to use Skype. So I think we need to be careful when we talk about the limited impact of social media, because it has many ways in which it reaches mass audiences. Now, these aren't just individuals that are out there filming these things. More and more, we are seeing a development, an evolution, I would say, where we have groups forming, okay? Let me get this for you right here. Okay. And so even you can tell the older generations that might not be connected are still, watching the main TV channels. This is a typical street in Beirut. People are out playing backgammon and watching TV through the window in their shop. So the TVs are on everywhere, and they're picking up those videos. I just have one more slide here I'm trying to find. Okay. So what's happening, though, is that we're seeing people form groups, individuals forming groups, and these brands. For the first time in Syria, the Syrian government, like other Arab governments, held a tight grip on the media, didn't allow for anything but the government propaganda on television. And now you have all these people forming these new media networks we never saw before in Syria. And these are actually, some of them, such as Sham, which means Damascus, and Ugarit News, are national opposition networks. They have Facebook pages, they have Twitter pages, they gather videos from across the whole country, they air them. But increasingly, we are seeing local media. So we have cities and towns in Syria, like Latakia. We have the Latakia LNN, Latakia News Network, a smaller town. We have the Deir ez-Zor Press Network. So these cities, these secondary cities, are getting their own media for the first time. That's very significant because of the media strategy of Arab governments, the focus of these government propaganda channels was on the capitals. So Damascus, Cairo, etc. That's where the media focused their attention, where you have a city like Homs in Syria with 1 million people and having really no media of its own, or much media to speak of. So for the first time, people are covering local news. Local news is a new concept across the Arab world that's happening a lot in Syria especially. Not only is it local news, but we have something called the Bab Amro News Network. Now, Bab Amro is a neighborhood within Homs. So we're having even a hyper-local news networks. And these are all publishing on Facebook and et cetera. What we're also seeing is the emergence of these new networks and brands. Here's one called Duma City. Okay, so a town that people, one of these guys living in the container, he told me, I never even heard of Baba Amro before, and he's living in another town in Syria. So people are learning about towns they've never heard about in their own countries. And Duma City and Baba Amro are now new news networks. So where in the past we had these two, Sham and Ugarit, national opposition networks, now people are going to the town's news to get their news, not just the national. So we're seeing that footage and having your own media outlet is very important politically. It's a kind of, footage is a kind of political capital now. And so it's almost as important as having guns and having aid supplies and having footage. These are kind of the three components now of the Syrian opposition. And because we see there's so many, these are just a few of the dozens of new media outlets. So many towns and cities have their own news. We're seeing this is kind of a reflection of the fragmentation of the opposition in Syria. Every situation is different. Every town, every neighborhood might have different media outlets. Not every neighborhood, but in certain cities there are up to 10 or 15 different local councils within one city. Now, we should see this development as part of the latest chapter of the Arab media revolution. So For the past 15 years, actually, there has been a revolution in the Arab world, not in the streets, but on the airwaves. And that all started mainly with Al Jazeera, which was launched in 1996. And this channel really changed the face of television news in the Arab world, because television news, as I said, we have 22 countries in the Arab League, probably had about 22 plus or minus propaganda channels, one for each country. So Al Jazeera actually came in from a small country like Qatar and decided to go and start saying news that wasn't good about Arab leaders, start broadcasting things that painted them in a negative light. So this really angered a lot of Arab governments, and they kicked Al Jazeera out. But as we can see, Al Jazeera today, 15 years later, is still one of the most popular channels, or the most popular channel in the Arab world. This revolution in the media in the Arab world also took place in the entertainment industry. We had the beginning of reality television in the Arab world, also about 10 years ago or so. And this caused a lot of controversy. We had shows like Star Academy, which is a reality show kind of like American Idol, okay? And the contestants get voted on. You can see here they're waiting for their percentage of their votes through telephone voting, SMS. The shows brought men and women together, young men and women together from all countries, Morocco, Tunis, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, etc., to live in a house together, these contestants. And that was very controversial because dating in many Arab countries is not allowed. Living together in the same house, hugging and kissing your co-star, this made a lot of people very angry. A lot of clerics especially were very angry. They issued fatwas, or religious edicts, against these shows. They tried to shut them down. Big Brother was shut down right away in Bahrain. But then we had this show emerge, Star Academy, and now it's in its like 7th or 8th season right now. I can't remember. But the show is still going strong. Now, the way this show works is that people vote for their favorite contestants. But then people are also allowed to text their own messages. And if we can kind of see here, there's a scroll bar where it will run text messages from the viewers at home. And here we can see. So here all the young people on the couches, sitting on each other's laps. This kind of thing was very angering to a lot of clerics and conservatives. And on the bottom of the screen is the text scroll. So people are SMSing, oh, I love this candidate, he's from my country, she's so cute, et cetera, et cetera. And this kind of drove the Saudi authorities a bit crazy. So they tried to ban the SMS texting to these shows. So again, but the government, the people in the country actually went around the ban because the government controls the telephone network, and they started voting for the contestants over the internet website. And so despite all the government's efforts, the Saudi government and the clerics' efforts, actually a Saudi contestant won the show on the 2nd or 3rd season. So we really saw we really saying the loss of influence of the government over controlling the message, and this is in the entertainment industry. What we're seeing now, I think it's the latest chapter. We're combining the interactive elements of these kind of shows and the kind of defiance of Al Jazeera, and we're bringing it into the creation of new media channels. I want to show you also another example of the media defeating power, political power in the Arab world. During the Egyptian revolution, the Egyptian government tried to block the signal of Al Jazeera. And what happened was that Al Jazeera's signal was scrambled, but television channels across the Arab world, in solidarity with Al Jazeera, broadcast their signal. So we see this is a Lebanese channel called OTV. They broadcast Al Jazeera's signal. This is a Lebanese channel called NBN. They broadcast Al Jazeera's signal. This is Al Jazeera thanking all of the other TV channels for broadcasting their signal when Mubarak tried to defeat them. And this is what Al Jazeera looked like on screen. It was black, but the other channels carried it live and defeated that. And they even tried to put cartoons in its place. So again, another example of the succession of failures that we're seeing by these governments in controlling the message, whether it be social or political in nature. I want to show you a couple more videos here. Now, another thing that we're seeing is that Al Jazeera, we know it is owned by the Qatari government, and it has a policy which reflects that government's foreign policy. Al Jazeera is not covering local issues in Qatar. Anything that gets close to home is even the revolution in Bahrain is not covered very well. So the reaction to this is we're seeing more and more local media, local stations. And people taking up cameras. So I want to show you some other examples, if I can find them. Oh, here we go. As I said, now the broadcasters like Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, they're very strong on Syria. They're showing the brutality of the regime. They're not really talking about what's happening close to home. But that is now changing because we are seeing now citizen journalists in Saudi Arabia. And this is a recent protest. You wouldn't see it on TV, but you would see it on the social media. Within Saudi Arabia, in a mall, it's where Saudis protest. And they're protesting for the release of people who have been detained. Let me see if this is going to load. The video will start shortly. So this YouTube channel has again branded itself and used this ticker saying breaking news. They're trying to emulate the news channels. And here we see the people marching into the mall. You won't see this on Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya so much. It's not just politics, though, and we're seeing the use of social media in a lot of contexts. We had in Lebanon, for example, an internet regulation act the government was trying to implement. And there was a big campaign on Twitter and Facebook to stop this government legislation. And they called it the Lebanese Internet Regulation Act, LIRA. They came up with a hashtag on Twitter, Stop LIRA. It went viral. Everybody tweeted it. And even anonymous, people are admiring Anonymous and trying to emulate that. And in the end, the minister said, well, we're going to rethink this law. So, in years past, before Twitter and Facebook and this kind of social media reporting, an organization among individuals, grassroots organization, a law like that might have easily passed and just slipped by the books without anybody putting up a big fight over it. And I want to show you one more interesting example of citizen media, and this is toward corporations in the Middle East. Corporations also need to be held accountable, just like governments. Even in small issues, we can see the rising up of people to claim their rights. And this man was on an airplane. Let me explain to you really. He was on a Lebanese airplane, and the airplane had broken seats, broken video, bad service. He decided to get out his camera, film the people, ask them what was wrong with their service, and this went on the blogs. It got viral. Lebanese it's a small community, so everybody was talking about this airplane incident. The airline actually banned the individual from the website, but then as more and more traffic came in, more and more tweets and people posting this message and these videos on their walls on Facebook, the company actually came out with a big apology. And then the local news media then picked up this guy's report. This is a major Lebanese TV channel. And we'll just watch it really quick here. So saying this guy took it upon himself to film what passengers were thinking.
وغير هيك
قصري حتى يريحوكي ما يقعدوا حدا قدامك. هو زي الحرام ما بتعرف انه وقت قالوا لها الطياره الاجر قال ما هيدي نحن رح نكبها على اساس انه بقيس ولبنان مرتاحين بشكل انه الطياره اذا بدها ندفت ريفربشمنت بنكبها.
So they're talking about, he said that the stewardess told him, well, this is an old plane, we're going to get rid of it. And he said, really? So we just have a small problem on our plane, we just throw planes away? So these messages really resonated because corporations in the Middle East, just like governments, have been really unaccountable.
بس هي كمان حافز لكل الشركات والمؤسسات والافراد لتحسن اوضاع لانه بعصر السوشيال ميديا او الاعلام الاجتماعي صار كل فرد مراسل.
So she's saying in the end, the reporter signs off saying that because of social media, every individual has become a correspondent. And the airline has apologized, issued a big, long apology, changed its total strategy of banning the guy, issued a huge apology when it got this big. And it got this big because of people at home on their computers, on their Twitter pages and Facebook pages. So I think there are a lot of challenges to talk about here. We can't just say that this is great. There are a lot of issues with citizen reporters. Some people don't even want to call them citizen journalists. Because of the very serious issues of accuracy. In Syria, activists have told me that they have done things to make videos look more exciting. They've told me that they have burned tires in the street to make the shelling, the smoke from burning tires, magnify the impact of the shelling for the sake of the cameras. I have heard that casualty numbers have been exaggerated. People want to, people really think that that's a way to get their message out, to exaggerate their story. So we are seeing exaggeration. And then we have the networks like Al Jazeera and its other rivals, its Saudi-owned rival Al Arabiya, both very interested as Gulf countries in getting rid of the government in Syria, not being very lax about these videos and allowing all kinds of things to air on their screens that might be old videos, they might be recycled. So there are a lot of dangers here, but I think the net effect that we're seeing, and journalists that follow this constantly can tell the fake videos. It's kind of a margin of error, not the rule. Although the regime says these are all fake videos. They take one video that has an issue, they say, oh, these are all fake. So that line isn't really working, though, and I think that we are seeing a margin of error, not the rule, because thousands and thousands of videos have been uploaded from Syria. And we can't say they're all fake, especially the first video I showed you. There's no way to really fake being shelled like that in the city streets. So what I'm hearing is that people believe that these young journalists, the more they get together, these people are becoming journalists for the first time. We're seeing more and more journalists in cities and towns and rural areas that never imagined being journalists. And they're getting together, forming new brands, like the brands that I showed you, each one with their little corner screen logo. And people believe that within time, some might close, some might consolidate, and these could be some of the Al Jazeeras of the future. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Habib, for that very interesting presentation. We're encouraging you all to please fill out that form or put down your question, and we will be collecting them and asking our guest here your questions, so we look forward to that. But I'll take a few minutes, if I can, to just pose a few to you. One of the things that you pointed out, that there's an industry now, there's really like a cottage industry almost in the sort of YouTube world to sort of get the more horrific, the most appalling videos. And clearly we know that the international community has reacted historically when these images are displayed on our television screen. And I wonder, in your opinion, are we going to see, as this conflict in Syria, for example, continues to deteriorate, do you think we're going to see more of this kind of sort of falsification of news as the stakes get higher and higher?
I think that it's going to be an inevitable problem. And we have falsification of news in the mainstream media as well. So we have to remember that a lot of stories that are run by the major broadcast networks in the United States, in Canada, everywhere, we have a lot of issues with media. So we're going to have those issues. I think that people are actively watching this sphere, and there are a lot of people that are involved watching this. And, I, for example, once tweeted something, and I had a small issue with what I was saying, and within like 1 moment, I had like 7 people who told me, "Well, no, that's not right," you know, and so people are watching this very closely and scrutinizing it. So as much as there are fakes out there are many people out there watching the fakes as well. So we have to realize that I think the net effect is that the good material rises to the top, and the bad material is jumped upon and tramped upon and shouted upon, and people want to also make names for themselves by pointing out stuff. So I think it's kind of a free market of criticism and ideas and stuff rise up. But there is one concern that I want to touch upon, which is the rise of some of these new, now I talk about internet channels, but there are also new satellite TV channels across in Syria, about a half a dozen new satellite TV channels. So also reaching out to the traditional media, in addition to the new media. These channels broadcast from Saudi Arabia or from Egypt or from London, for example, into Syria. Now, some of these channels have taken on a very sectarian tone. One of these channels has a very firebrand cleric who had said things like the Sunni blood is one, and Alawites that fight with the regime should be fed to the dogs. So there is also the danger of having very sectarian, hateful media, and we've seen that in Iraq as well. We've seen a lot of channels in Iraq, anti-Shiite, anti-Sunni channels. So there are going to be a lot of negative things that happen as well in this media revolution.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that is really interesting about the satellite televisions in the Middle East is that there's no subscription costs. So you buy the terminal, you install it for in the range of $200 to $300, and there you have satellite. So unlike we have issues here in Canada with the really appalling costs of satellite television, but we pay a lot per month, and that regulates the market, if you will. In the case of the Middle East, as you know very well, we have 1,000 satellite channels, some of which maybe perhaps 50% is junk. We know that it takes, I think $80 million I last heard to get your own personal satellite channel. So, every millionaire, every billionaire, we know this very well in the Middle East, sort of anyone who has a little bit of money is creating their own satellite channel. And we're dumbing down the conversation. When would you say we're at that point where we have too much? I remember, I think many in the audience too, when we had, 5 channels to choose from. There was the few that you could, and now, it's endless. I have 1,000 channels. I have the rotisserie channel sponsored by Swiss Chalet. I have a lot of unnecessary channels. Are we at that point now in the Middle East where we can say there's a lot of junk?
Yes, there's tons. There's 1,000 channels, like you pointed out, and probably about 20 or 30 of them have content, actual programming. There are more than that, but I'm talking about a full grid of programming. I tend to think, though, that the more cameras we have in the Middle East on the streets, the more people witnessing things in front of them, and there's plenty of things to witness every day that's not being covered. So we have such a surplus of a need of coverage that at this point I wouldn't discourage at all of the proliferation of these channels. And it's also not happening only on TV, but now there's more of a focus shifting away from TV and to the internet, and whether it's Skype or Facebook, etc. More people are getting connected and looking at alternative media. And I think that the good things will rise to the top. I think out of those 1,000 channels in the Middle East today, a lot of them are watched by almost no one. The ratings are very low. Even the United States, France, have all launched Arabic language news channels over the past 10 years. And these are big budget channels trying to get their kind of agenda across, and their ratings are almost nil. So viewers are very sophisticated, I think. They're not going to really watch stuff that has low quality. And I think the good things will rise up, and whether it's online or on television.
And actually it can backfire, right? The Americans, for example, launched Ahora in Iraq, which spent most of the time really talking about how life is great. showing wonderful scenes of people being happy, and it really was not a reflection of reality of life on the street. So it actually increased anti-Americanism among the Iraqi people, who were quite frustrated with the occupation and knew that outside the matter was really quite devastating. Can I ask you, I noticed sort of two trends in your presentation. On the one hand, you were talking about how all of these channels were leading to fragmentation, in the sense that we have these little, fiefdoms now in parts of Syria, for example, that are creating their own channel. And similarly, on the corporate side, even we know, again, millionaires are now increasingly deciding to create their own channels throughout the Middle East. But at the same time, we have a phenomena of sort of nationalism, Arab nationalism, across the region. So where before, a citizen of Morocco never used to see what a citizen from Jordan is like. And now you have this new sort of Arab nationalism across the media landscape, where they are watching Al Jazeera, where they do have programs like Star Academy. How do you see these two trends? I mean, do you think we're going to see more of these sort of sophisticated nationalist kind of networks like Al Jazeera thrive, or one of my favorites is one called Fetafit, which is like basically a food network for the Arab world, and it has a chef from one country almost every hour, so you want people in Lebanon are learning how to make a Moroccan dish, and people in Lebanon are learning how to make a Saudi dish, and that's sort of a new sort of Arab nationalism. Mm-hmm. Can you sort of reflect on what you think is sort of the trend moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's two ways. I think it goes also nationalistic because of the reality shows, especially. Mm-hmm. We've had so many reality TV shows, and the contestants come from each different country. So unlike, they're not contestants based on their personality as much, people are voting for them because of their country, the Jordanian candidate, the Egyptian candidate, the Saudi candidate, etc. That also kind of is kind of divisive, I think, too, because people kind of root for their country, their native son. But at the same time, we are, because of television is a great Arab regionalizing factor, because of the fact that, we have Egyptian programs, Syrian programs that are very popular across the region. Now we're having collaborations between Egyptian, Syrian, Lebanese, Kuwaiti, Emirati, different producers getting together. And some of the shows that we're seeing are having actors from different countries as well. And yeah, in the Arab world, we are pretty distant from each other. I think that people often do know little about the countries around them, even though that there's the idea that the Arab world is this kind of monolith and that they're all kind of one. It's actually not the case. I think people really know little about, many Lebanese know little about Morocco. They probably would go on vacation to France before going to Morocco, or other countries similar. So at the same time, though, I think that it's important that we have this local effect and that we have more media about the local, your town and your village and your city. So I think, yeah, it's working in both directions.
Yeah. You really pointed out in your presentation about the effect of Facebook and Twitter to sort of name and shame government, which is obviously in a region that is probably the lowest in achieving sort of scores of democratization or political liberalization. That's a really powerful and new tool for people demanding new kinds of rights. Can you reflect on sort of the activities that you've seen work? I mean, you gave us the example of the Middle East Airlines, but we'd love to hear sort of other examples, the campaigns that worked.
They're still new. There's not a huge number of examples, I think, but I also give the example of the Lebanese internet, and we had the regulation being fought over. Accountability is one of the greatest effects of this social media revolution, I think, and we saw accountability with Al Jazeera on the state level, and now we're seeing it on the local level with these new outlets and individuals, and hopefully we're going to see more accountability on the local level in municipalities. Municipalities throughout the region are not really the focus, because everybody thinks about the capitals, talks about the Arab-Israeli conflict, but what about your municipality and your village and your mayor, and where are the budgets? Are they transparent? So I'm hoping that will be the next stage. As we saw in Saudi Arabia, there are changes happening. In Kuwait, there was a campaign through text message that helped get people out in the streets protesting certain legislation. They actually were successful. So the examples, I think, are still coming, but these are some of the main ones that I guess I see right now. I think that they're happening all the time, actually, in many countries. It's stuff we don't really hear about every day.
Are governments getting more sophisticated about now using social media for their purposes?
Yes, they have Facebook pages, the government TV channels, and a lot of likes on there.
Government officials, I mean, are they really getting involved?
Yes. It's funny because now the news media in Lebanon, for example, has stories about not just video soundbite of what this politician said, but what did he tweet? So we'll bring up in the evening news the tweets of the prime minister, and we'll talk about them. And what did the prime minister say? And people are really, even also in pop culture, Haifa Wahbi is one of the famous pop stars in the Arab world. She had a big controversy recently about what she was tweeting with someone, how people react in their tweets. So there are more and more ways to really hold people accountable and monitor people and make things public, and this empowerment of individuals that really had no power at all to be part of the system are now engaging and talking to people on Twitter. And so we have the prime minister responding on Twitter, but also these officials, probably like officials in other countries, have people run their Twitter accounts. So it's not always clear who is tweeting, if the prime minister is really tweeting or if it's somebody tweeting on his behalf. One of the telecom minister in Lebanon is one of the biggest tweeters. So we have a list now in Lebanon of who tweets most, which ministers tweet most, the president. We have stats on their tweets, the prime minister, the president. Even during evening, political talk shows, we'll see a politician get out his phone and read, his emails during a political talk show, heated talk show. So technology is really getting all over the place, whether it's from this official level or the individuals.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think is sort of the untapped opportunities that the broadcasting business, so to speak, hasn't quite figured out in the Middle East? I mean, what's on the cusp of happening that you see that you think is coming down the road, or that we should be coming down the road? You have a lot of investors possibly in the room if you have a good idea.
Well, the expansion of pushing these boundaries is what's happening, and from Al Jazeera onward, and I think that the one region that remains kind of very virgin for journalism is the Arab Gulf region,
right?
And that's where all the money is, and all the big broadcasters are, and they've done a really good job of covering other countries, but within Saudi Arabia, within Qatar, within all these countries, Bahrain is a bit of an exception. But journalism is not really practiced in a lot of ways. It's very sycophantic, very praising the leader, etc. Nothing is wrong, everything is great, the economy is wonderful, the king is wonderful. So there's plenty of places where media is not operating, and these are just very kind of small upstarts, what I've been showing. And I think one of the biggest things lacking in journalism in the Middle East is investigative journalism. So we have a lot of reactive statements, and even Al Jazeera and these big channels, they really it's a very surface level of reporting. We don't really see the kind of undercover camera, months-long, year-long investigation.
We need a Geraldo Rivera of the Middle East.
Perhaps. We do have a lot of talking heads, a lot of shouting, a lot of emotions on television, but the kind of studied, long-term, really investment in programming and really good quality programming. I mean, it's telling that today in the Middle East, the most popular programs are dubbed Turkish soap operas.
Right, yes.
So where is the local production industry when dubbed content is more popular? So there's a really long ways to go in terms of production values.
Yeah.
Some of these shows do have pretty big budgets. A big budget is considered $5 or $6 million or more, which is still there's a lot to be desired, I think, in terms of the relevance of the shows, the relevance, the issues being covered. Really kind of getting bolder and bolder and bolder and going out there and talking about stuff, because there's plenty that's not being talked about.
Well, it's interesting because, it has made its way on print media. Sort of investigative journalism is popular in the Middle East, sort of, finding out the ministry that's corrupt, or finding out why are, gas prices going. All these sort of, real social issues, for example, are really investigated quite nicely in the print media. What's the challenge, or what's the reason why we don't see it take it to the next level in terms of broadcasting?
I don't know. I don't know that it's, I think there's still a lot to be desired, even in the print media. I think that there's a lot of accusations about people, but kind of less systemic analysis. And a lot of general statements about corruption, but less specific names and individuals, and really kind of studying the system. What's it going to take? I think that there's a lot of push and pull effect with all these new media. So we see, like I said, the news, the traditional media reporting on Twitter. Recently, one of the Lebanese channels did a live stream of shooting in the streets. So people on Twitter started talking about the live stream on the traditional broadcaster. So there's a lot of influencing and pushing and pressuring. The entertainment channels in the Middle East, NBC Group, for example, started as an entertainment channel, and then with Al Jazeera being, so popular in news, they kind of were pressured into, or kind of influenced into going into news as well. So we're seeing a lot of influence back and forth, and I think now that the local new citizen journalists having their cameras, like this guy on the air flight, getting on all the major broadcast media, that's kind of pushing them to, hey, we should be doing more investigations like that.
Absolutely.
I think. So I think a lot of pressure will come now from this newly empowered generation of tweeps and cell phone video holders.
Yeah, I think it's pointing out sort of the cell phone. As you noted, internet connectivity is still weak generally in the Middle East. I mean, it's improving rapidly, but everybody has a cell phone. Some people have two cell phones. I mean, it's sort of silly, but in some countries where there's two carriers, and it may be cheaper to actually have two phones rather than call the opposite carrier from one or the other phone. Are we seeing sort of the video journalism in other places other than hot zones or conflict zones like Syria making an impact?
You mean just new media in general, new media enterprises? Yes, definitely. This is not limited to Syria. There are dozens of new channels that have been birthed in the revolutions, local channels, and Libya has many new channels, Tunisia, Egypt. I've heard that there are 200 new publications in Libya alone since over the past year or so. So yeah, it is definitely spreading, and I think that we're going to see more and more of that.
Are we going to see more, you think, foreign investors come in and capitalize on a very young demographic, for example, in the Arab world? Are we going to see more well-known international investors come to the Arab world and launch their own media channels?
Well, we've seen that. Rupert Murdoch has just recently helped launch with the Emirates, the UAE government, Sky News Arabia. And it's actually very interesting what they're doing. I think I would call this the Empire Strikes Back because there are now more and more news channels being launched by millionaires and billionaires trying to react to this social media situation. We have Walid bin Talal, who is one of the most prominent billionaires in the Middle East, launching a news channel with Bloomberg, a partnership with Bloomberg. So very business friendly, probably, station. So we have the Bloomberg, we have the Sky Arabia, we have a new channel, a new kind of pro-Hezbollah TV channel that's emerging on the scene. That's international audience and scope and sophisticated, a lot of money there. We don't know where the money is coming from exactly right now. It's kind of been hard to find out on that one. So we are seeing, at the same time, these small kids with laptops and cell phones and running around the streets, and we're seeing, the millionaires and the billionaires throwing in their money, Bloomberg getting involved, Murdoch News Corporation getting involved. So yeah, we are seeing, there are probably more channels, news channels available to the Arab world than most regions, France, Russia has a channel, an Arabic channel. China has two Arabic channels.
Wow.
They have, I just recently saw Chinese television having a news channel and a music video channel. So Chinese music videos subtitled in Arabic with a Chinese host that speaks Arabic fluently. So there is it's a gold rush.
Yeah.
People are saying this is a gold rush for the hearts and minds of the Middle East, where the resources lie, and everybody wants a piece of that.
Fascinating, and it's really interesting that these trends are happening at two different levels. You got the billionaires, but at the same time you have these citizen journalists who are often very young. I mean, it's really quite fascinating.
Many of them are teenagers or in their early 20s, most probably.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I think this is the time of the evening we'll take questions. So please pass your questions along. Thank you. Okay. So this is a question about the use of social media. Is this use of social media as a tool of protest similar to the use of pamphlets in the populist protests of Europe and North America, i.e. the 1600s to 1700s? And don't worry, it's a librarian that asks you this question. So.
I'm not really familiar with the 1600s and 1500s pamphlets. I imagine that these are not new trends and that definitely these are populist media have a trend across the world, definitely. I mean, yeah.
So just to follow up on this question, where are people getting their news from in the Arab world? What's the sort of number 1, 2, 3 source? Are they going first to the internet, or is it satellite television? Is it print media? How would you sort of categorize it?
Well, there aren't a lot of information specifically, but we know that the ratings, that Al Jazeera remains probably the most popular channel in the Arab world. And I think it will remain that way for now. I think even Sky Arabia has just been launched, Murdoch's partnership with the UAE prince. Mm-hmm. And I've been watching the channel, and it's you can tell that it's much less in your face, less of those kind of running videos down the street kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's kind of more sanitized. They're using kind of infographics, and I think that Al Jazeera has that spark still. Mm-hmm. That's keeping it very popular and that controversial, right. That kind of Fox News element, maybe to some extent. So yeah, television is still the biggest medium, right. in the Arab world. Like I showed you, people in containers, people in huts watching TV, but increasingly having BlackBerries, yeah. and having internet connections. So some people tell me they get their news on Skype, mm-hmm. now. Before the news comes on Skype, before it comes on the TV channels.
Can I ask something, because you notice this very well as much as anybody else, but there aren't a lot of advertisements on these channels, which, really leads to the suspicion that you've, yes. probably heard, which is, where are they making money? Yeah. They're selling the dish for $300, mm-hmm. they're not charging the Arab user a monthly fee, and there's no advertisement. So what's going on?
Yeah, it's not a good business. Arab TV is not a good business. It's the worst. I mean, if you have millions of dollars, then you could just put it in some kind of fund or something and make money. The advertising market is worth around $1 billion. It's not really clear also to what extent there's exaggeration in the figures. And having $1 billion market for 1,000 channels, it's kind of difficult to sustain them, especially if some channels are spending $500 million to start up. Mm-hmm. So they're spending the half of the market. This is obviously a business of hearts and minds. It's a business where the profit is influence. It's not, this is at least for the big glitzy channels. And Al Jazeera, of course, is one of them. I mean, mm-hmm. One of the senior editors at Al Jazeera told me once that during the first few years of launch, when it started to create this buzz, Saudi investors approached the channel and wanted to buy it for about $5 billion. And the Qataris decided not to sell. Mm-hmm. Why did they didn't sell? Because governments invest billions of dollars in public relations. And Al Jazeera was costing the Qatari government like $200 or $300 million per year. Yeah. And that was the best public relations anyone can ever imagine, because this tiny little state, we'd never heard of it before. And how better way to put your country on the map, but to have a channel like that. And even, the billions invested in defense. Here's little Qatar, right. influencing the region with without really any significant military. So more and more people are looking at the power of broadcasting as a tool, as a weapon, as an influencer, and that's really where the profit is. And so I don't think people are going into this business to make money. And so it makes you consider what Rupert Murdoch is doing in this industry as well.
Interesting. Well, the irony, Bloomberg in the Middle East is probably doing this at a loss in some way.
Well, I would also say that the thing is that some of these joint ventures, probably like the Bloomberg venture and the Sky Arabia venture, you have to consider that for these companies, they could find ways, probably, depending on how things are how the books are kept. Whereas the Emirati government might host the studios. They might, buy the studios. So there might be little investment for some of these big brands.
Right.
And they might be actually making money through deals that they have. There could be other deals. There could be other financial deals at stake. We know that Rupert Murdoch is in a lot of trouble right now. So he might want to divest some assets. And why not? People have suggested maybe the Gulf countries might want to buy some of those assets. So there could be some deals under the table here that we're not really aware of, and a lot of facilities that are provided at low cost. So there could be ways in which it's really unclear. The profitability, very, very few Arab channels of those 1,000 are profitable, if any.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at just sort of the landscape, and it really is a conundrum. How are these channels making money under the circumstances of no subscription costs? And as I said, unbelievable little amount of advertising, and it's sort of the reverse here. We
Well,
see
the
a
only
lot
ads on Al Jazeera have a Q in them. So Qatar Gas, Qatar Telephone, Qatar, all the government's industries advertise. Everything on Al Jazeera has a Q in it. And people don't want to advertise in Al Jazeera because Al Jazeera has this stigma. A lot of the big brands like Procter & Gamble and that, you don't see them wanting to be associated with Al Jazeera. So they're going to Al Arabiya, which is getting a lot of the market share. But again, what is that cost to the government of Qatar to run, having so much money to run this channel? They've got their flag on Gaddafi's compound.
Right.
So,
well, with an army of 11,000 people, I mean, pretty incredible. That it could do that with 11,000 people of an army. So pretty incredible.
Well, not all of them Qatari.
Yes, well, that's a whole other problem. Mercenaries is another issue. This is Tessa, a student of the University of Waterloo. How are states who wish to remain authoritarian responding to citizen journalism?
Well, as I said, we've had this signal jamming. We've had, which is just another failed attempt by these governments to control the message. And the clerics and the fatwas and all that stuff. In Syria today, the new channels are constantly jammed, so people have to go home every day and retune their dishes. And the channels keep changing frequencies. So that's how they get around that. The channels change frequencies. They post their frequencies online or on their channel. They say, we're changing to this frequency, please follow us. And so it's a routine activity. You go home, we got to reprogram the dish, spend like 5-10 minutes, and then all the channels come back again. Yeah. So again, it's they're making a little, or in the case of Lebanon, broadcasters carrying their signal. And to talk about also the Syrian new satellite channels while I'm on the subject, some of them are becoming sophisticated. It's not all very amateur. Some of them have correspondence. Some of them, they also have live coverage, so they can have people doing Ustream on their cell phones and sending it straight to the channel, and you have live feeds, sometimes split live feeds from different towns in Syria. So people are saying these could become, big broadcasters in the future. They might join together. Maybe the Sham with the Ugarit might come together. Maybe some of these small town networks. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, also in the towns and villages, big towns in the Arab world of 1 million people don't have much media.
Yeah. Well, that follows up on one of the questions here. I mean, do you think that local media is more likely to be objective and truthful than, say, some of the larger media networks like Al Jazeera and CNN reporting what's actually happening? Or are they too hand-picked and tailored?
Well, this is the model I think that Al Jazeera English is following. And one of their slogans was, I think...
everywhere.
I think the view from the ground, from wherever they're reporting from. So people from those areas reporting, not having journalists parachute in to countries and not know much about it, but we trust them because they look like us.
Right.
We want people who are actually locals, who can tell the stories of what's going on there. And I think that has a lot of merit. I'm kind of skeptical of the idea that a lot of big newspapers think that their correspondents have to be pulled out because they get too cozy and they get too local or whatever. I think that we need to have more local views.
What an interesting way of looking at it, right? I mean, that's fascinating because we have this sort of image of the war correspondent, right? Going from New York to the war zone and then leaving, but they never come with as you point out, the local context, the cultural sensitivity of what's actually happening on the ground. And we've been forcing this idea that we need to be objective. And perhaps in telling the news, it's about subjectivity, actually understanding the context of what one is reporting about can really, portray the truth of what's happening. So it's a really interesting flip on, I think, what media studies has grappled with for so many years, traditional media at least.
Yeah, I think that, there's no such thing as objectivity, and you're definitely not going to get it from somebody who who just brings with them also their baggage of what they perceive from and how they're going to look at local people and. So I mean, of course, there are many wonderful foreign correspondents out there that do great work. I just don't see any reason why we can't see more local media. And I think that ironically, the Syrian government's move of clamping down and closing down foreign media has really helped the Syrian local media. I mean, despite all the violence and the tragedy going on, this kind of silver lining is that people have been forced to tell their stories for the first time.
It's interesting, and this follows into the question that we have here, which is, as we've seen, Syria has obviously descended into more and more chaos. The massacres in Hula and Kuber and other places. We're starting to see some of those horrific images, and children is one sort of image that I think is a universal sort of, it hits a universal chord in everybody's hearts. Do you think we will get to the point where we become desensitized? These sort of grainy, even myself, even seeing these, YouTube videos after a while, they all start to look the same. Is there a danger that we become desensitized with the overload, particularly of sort of the YouTube genre kind of video?
Yeah, I mean, we are becoming desensitized, obviously. I don't know how that can be stemmed or whatever, but I think that it's also important to see things as they are, and I think that we censor a lot of things in the Western media, especially the images. Even Al Jazeera English to Al Jazeera Arabic, the images are far apart. The kind of carnage that we see. I think that there is room for definitely more creativity in reporting events. I think that the coverage on Al Jazeera often is really like kind of aerial shots from buildings and people getting shot, and it doesn't really give you that personal insider, humanizing perspective and telling stories, rich stories, which is something that a lot of American broadcasters have done and Western broadcasters have done a great job of over the years, of honing in on that personal story. So, and kind of more, literary journalism and talking about scenes and places and voyages and that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of room for that as well, to kind of enrich the coverage from just these kind of shock and awe images that we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much. This has been enlightening. But if I could just kind of pick up a little more. We really want to see, and hear more about your work. So we'd love for you to tell us about sort of how you reach out to people. How do you communicate with the world, and how many of these great folks in the audience can keep the conversation up? Yeah,
well, I have a blog, and you could please come to it. It's BeirutReport.com, one word, BeirutReport.com. I get on Twitter, and I'm covering, all the changes going on in Lebanon and the region right now. So would really welcome anybody to join the conversation. Email me, comment on the blog.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Habib Fatah. Thank you.
Well, yes, thank you indeed. Thank you very much to our guest speaker, Habib Fatah, and also our discussant, Bessma Momani, for the excellent discussion tonight, for what you described as a gold rush for the hearts and minds in the Arab world. We certainly learned a lot about the new citizen journalists, the new startup networks, the city-based news brands. I loved the way you showed us these things. We were able to experience them here ourselves. Certainly, we've been spoiled here in the West with all the glut of media we have. I confess there are days when I would welcome a fatwa against reality television in this society. But in societies that have been repressed, where voices have been repressed, I'm sure we all agree it's wonderful to see all these new things opening up, not just in politics, but even against bad airline seats and all the rest of it. People pushing the boundaries. So thank you for introducing us to a lot of these ideas. And I do encourage the audience to check into his blog at BeirutReport.com. I'll just repeat that for you. And I want to thank you once again on behalf of all of us. A Couple of very brief notes for audience before we adjourn. The video from tonight's live webcast will be edited and posted to CIGI's website in our online video archive. I'd like to say thanks to the Balsley School of International Affairs for their support in making this lecture a success tonight, as well as CIGI's event sponsors 570 News and Wordsworth Books. Please also note the final CIGI signature lectures in this season is coming up on June 21st. That is the Canadian launch of a major CIGI report entitled Unleashing the Nuclear Watchdog, Strengthening and Reform of the International Atomic Energy Agency. CIGI Senior Fellow Trevor Finley will be here to present his findings on how the IAEA has been performing and how it should be improved. And this is part of a worldwide launch. Yesterday, the world premiere of this report was in Vienna, right near the IAEA headquarters. Today, we were in Chatham House in London, England. But it's coming to Waterloo on the 21st. Over the summer, stay tuned to our events calendar online so we can introduce you to what's coming up for the new season beginning in September. And thank you once again for coming to CIGI tonight. Have a safe journey home.